right. Hey there. What's going on, everybody? Chris Franks with TexasWest Capital. Man, I apologize, everybody. We had a power outage right as we were set to go live. And apparently that just completely burned my computer. So I had to pull out the laptop real quick. Hopefully this will do all right. But I've got Tillman and Andrew hanging in the wings there. We're going to talk about Bitcoin stuff here and try to make it work anyway. As always, hit the thumbs up, hit the like, hit the subscribe, all those fun things. Follow us. And man, oh man, we'll jump on in here. Let's bring the guys in here. What's going on, guys?
Hey.
Man, so yeah. So again, right as I told these guys, we were backstage, they said, all right, let's go live. The second I said that, everything here went black. We got rain and whatever. Lawn guys going up to mow in the rain. I mean, I don't get today. Absolutely crazy day. But how are y'all?
We expect those types of shenanigans. You know, there's a lot of people that don't want us on the air because of all the potent truth that we're dropping. So, you know, it's just.
Well, I like that. I'll go with that. I'll believe that. But man, oh man. So, you know, title of today's show here, talking about Bitcoin activity here is lowest in 1.5 years. Usually this precedes some strong price action. So I know Andrew's still calling for what, 254 by the end of the year?
Yeah, you know, I put out a post, I don't know, half hour ago, and it's very, very simple. Paul Tudor Jones, Larry Fink, and Ray Dalio. Those guys have all become bullish on Bitcoin for one reason or another. So it goes back to what Satoshi said. You know, it might make some sense to get some just in case it catches on. Right. So that's where we are. We're ranging in between, you know, 108 and 110.5 for the last 2 days. What a world we live in. Right. What a world we live in.
And people are bearish, right?
Bitcoiners have gotten so bored post the Bitcoin conference that we're now arguing about knots and nodes and runes and block size and, you know,
no, you opened up the can of worms. We're going to have to talk about that for the next 30 minutes now.
Yeah. So it never ceases to amaze me that when we get to certain levels, there's new, you know, versions of, you know, we're bored with price action, you know, at 110. So let's talk about something dumb that could ruin the price action. And so that's where we find ourselves.
Well,
yeah.
The other part of what I was going to say there was that retail, apparently retail participation in Bitcoin is down at like 2020 levels. So, man,
that surprised me. Listen, I honestly think that's a sign of true utility coming to Bitcoin. And what I mean by that is like for a long time, it was just a speculative vehicle. People got in only for the price increase potential, only for the volatility. Now it's actually being looked at as a store of value and an anti-inflationary hedge instrument. That is an incredibly profound thing that can't be ignored. Why? Well, those two use cases appeal to different markets, right? You know, which market are we appealing to right now? Well, we're appealing to institutional money. And I think the corporate adoption and the institutions and the sovereign nation and the pension funds and all of the big money pots are all more excited about Bitcoin than ever before. And guess what? That's okay. That means that you have a bunch of retail people that $100,000 or $110,000 is worth more to them than owning a Bitcoin. And that's okay too, right? That's the natural evolution of the cycles. And God only knows 100 years from now what the concentration of Bitcoin is going to look like. If I had to guess, it's going to be about 5 large entities on the earth and no one else. And they'll never sell it because they know they won't get it back. And they don't need fiat, so they're never going to depart with something at any rate that is an inferior asset to them holding forever. And, you know, that's just the natural, you know, consolidation of growing markets, essentially.
There's a surge right now of people figuring out that even adding small amounts of Bitcoin to your balance sheet, if you're running a business, you're running any sort of entity, that it's a force multiplier. And I'll give you a very simple example of that. So Peter Thiel, who's a reasonably smart investor, PayPal, Facebook, the whole thing, right? Peter Thiel, he's good at what he does. He invested in and propped up an exchange called Bullish, maybe a year and a half ago. Well, they just filed to go public. Part of their filing is they're going to hold significant amounts of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So it's another company that's doing the Bitcoin thing as a force multiplier, rushing to the public markets to IPO, because what has happened? The Naka thing happened. The Circle thing happened. So you're looking at Bitcoin focused companies or even crypto focused companies, stable coin companies. Think about Circle's business, man. There's no version of explosive revenue growth over the next 2, 3, 4 years to justify the fact that Circle went up 300 some odd percent. There's just no version of it. Their business is gonna move like this, over the next, 5 years. So the fact that there are others that are rushing to jump on this bandwagon, it means that it's just not going to stop. It's just absolutely not going to stop.
We look very geriatric on this call right now. We've got hiccup boy and got nose pressed to the camera boy. I mean, what is going on?
I'm waiting for you to show off your feet, Tillman. That's what's coming next.
Yeah. Hey, I'm struggling here, man. I'm just glad I had a laptop ready that I could pop on here.
But my point is that you don't have, again, Nakamoto go from $1 pre-IPO to $27. I don't even care what it's trading at now, 15, 18, whatever the number is. That's a 15 to 30x inside of a couple months. Circle, we've got people that we know that were pre-IPO shares of Circle. I mean, good grief, they've made money hand over fist. So the response in IPO markets like this, it triggers a cascading effect. That cascading effect is investors want to put money into it. Investment banking wants to do the deal. And then organizations see that, investors want to be involved. Investment bankers can't wait to do the deal. So there's an absolute rainbow and pile of gold at the end of all this. Let's do it as fast as we possibly can. So that's what's going to be happening over the next 6 months in the space, which means huge amounts of capital, huge amounts of new paper money with equity shares that they can do stuff with. And so it's, that is going to drive price like crazy in the space with Bitcoin.
I think you're right. And I think that's the sizzle on the steak, but it's not actually the steak. I think the steak is that, to have a strong country, you have to have a strong dollar and you have to have a strong middle class. And middle class strength relies upon entrepreneurism. That's what makes America great. That's what gives us the advantages, the idea that anybody can start a business tomorrow and they can be successful in it without discrimination. They just have to appeal to the market, right? And I think that, everybody's talking about the Nakamotos of the world, obviously Michael Saylor and what he's doing on a variety of fronts at this point. But I think the untold story that's going to change the fabric of our future, that more significantly than any of that by a huge multiplier, is I think that corporations that are very small, like mom and pop plumbing companies, and just entrepreneurs at a grand scale have started to understand that adding Bitcoin is a better savings account for their net profits than anything else. And when you have that kind of influx that is a constant buy, it's a force that we could see drive price up, incredibly. And I think that's coming. I think that you're going to see, we're working on at Arch Public like 5 of these deals, and it's only accelerating. We're getting calls now from more and more people that say, I need growth capital, right? Or I have been successful and I'm sitting on a bunch of cash and I want some Bitcoin. Like they want to deploy Bitcoin treasury strategies at their level and they want to do it now. And when you, what I like about that is this. If you talk about the zombie companies that are being resurrected for public share issuance and debt issuance against buying Bitcoin, that, in my opinion, will be commoditized pretty quickly, and there's not going to be that big of a distinction between the offerings unless you're taking risk that you shouldn't take, which is going to kill a lot of those companies and put
A
them
lot of them are
under.
going to do it. Yeah.
They're going to all have to do it because there's no other way to get the market share that you're invested in getting. And so those types of ventures, I think, will consolidate exceptionally quickly. What I think will be much more impactful is this rising tide of small companies that are adding it and then getting exceptional growth curves advantage wise to their competitors. And what does that mean? It means that if you're doing 25% net profit margins in a business, you can take it to 50% with a 10% allocation in Bitcoin. If you're doing a net 10%, net profit, think about that. That's a competitive industry. 2-3% is 20 to 30% movement in your net profit increase. Well, what if by adding 10% of your net profits into Bitcoin, so taking that 10% and getting 1% and putting it into Bitcoin and waiting 5 years, if Bitcoin does what it's done over the last 16 years, you've doubled that 10% net profit number to 20% with exceptionally small exposure. So the downside risk is if Bitcoin goes to zero, you lose 1% of your available cash. But the upside is that you double your net revenue from 10 to 20%, putting yourself in a position to take market share from competitors. You can literally, with that model, go out, borrow money from a bank, go acquire companies that don't have a Bitcoin treasury that look like yours, and just inject the policy and refinance the business on a new valuation with debt capital, no different than you would if you bought a strip mall. It was 50% occupied. You found tenants for the other 50%. You went and refinanced it for more cash out, and then you put that cash into other deals. Like that's the type of money loop that's about to be recognized by, I think, every small business in the country. And
Except
I'm
a lot
excited.
easier with Bitcoin.
Well, I'm here for it because I think there's no quicker way to reestablish the middle class in America than that. There is no better way. It would be no different than if the federal government said at birth, we're buying everybody $2,000 of Bitcoin and we're just going to leave it alone. Think about what that would do to the price of Bitcoin and think about what it would do to the wealth of the middle class in America 25 years from now. Insane. Yeah, you can't do it with any other vehicle.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that with the $2,000 there, Trump pushing this, everybody born between 2025 and 2029 or whatever, $1,000 given to them, to their guardian, to invest or whatever, the way the guardian sees fit.
What if I identify as being born in 2026? Does that count?
No, that went out with the Democrats last time, man. You can't identify with anything nowadays, man. But but I mean, that brings up an interesting point. If that does pass, if something like that does pass, I don't know. Does that encourage people to have children? I don't think so. Worldwide, we're just really kind of.
If you think kids cost less than $2,000, I got a bridge to sell you.
What was that again?
I said, if you think kids cost less than $2,000, I got a bridge to sell you.
The sad thing is, we have a lot of people talking about, it's too expensive to have kids and whatever. And I honestly don't think that's the real reason why most people aren't having kids. But, for decades now, worldwide, the whole, child birth rate has been dropping. And, Japan, we were all talking about Japan for a long time because but man, now it's hitting everybody, even the US. And, how do you grow that? How do you do that? Now we got AI coming in. So maybe AI helps, make it not as bad as quickly. with an aging workforce and less people being born and whatnot. But you've got to have that birth rate coming back up. And I mean, here's something that maybe you can add to that, right?
Well, I think you're right. I do think the birth rate needs to be high. I do think that there's a trend in the opposite direction, like Elon has said for a while. I do think an incentive to have kids in America is a good idea. Why do I think it's a good idea? Well, because the more Americans we have, it's just the sheer law of numbers, right? If America churns out 300 million new babies over the next X number of years, there's going to be a couple of Elon Musks in that population. People who change the world, people who make economies that we all get to work in and benefit from. Those types of people come from lots of people having lots of kids. It's not like every kid that comes out has that same potential. So why would we not want to be farming the future potential of the intelligence that can be harvested inside the U.S. population by encouraging more Americans to have more kids? Like, that to me is, I know it's pretty, cut and dry and not very emotional, but and warm and fuzzy, but it is just the simple facts, right? You have to have more people to have brighter and brighter minds come out of that populace.
Well, I'm doing my part over here, guys. I think you got to double it up, ahead of the curve. You know what I mean? I'm ahead of the curve. I'm doing all I can. You know what I'm saying?
But definitely that, and just as a workforce, even, again, you need people, right? And and I often see, here's my thing. So, I'm doing a lot of writing, which is really getting me creatively thinking. And, I look at these concepts like declining birth rates and increase in AI and what that potentially means for the future, as potential plots and bits to put into stories and whatnot. So I'm constantly thinking about this. But I think, it comes down to, okay, so what do you do for yourself? Well, I think you have to get Bitcoin. I think that's the first thing you do. I
think you have to ask the why first, right? So to me, it starts with, what do I want out of life? Well, I want a life where my money works for me and not me for my money. Okay. Yeah. What vehicles are out there that have proven to be exceptionally high probability vehicles to let me achieve that? Bitcoin's on that list at the very top with some other things, right? You start with what you want out of life. And I think I tell this to my kids all the time when they're struggling with making a decision, like, should I do this or should I do this, or what? There's too many options and there's too many voices telling them, oh, I want you to do this because of that. And it all comes down to, what do you think you should do and what do you want to do? And if you can't identify that voice throughout your life, you're going to be pushed in a lot of directions that you don't want to be pushed in. So it comes down to, like, what kind of life do you want to live? And guess what? The more you want out of life, the more it's going to cost you to get there. And that's just the facts. You know what I mean?
And I talk about this constantly, because, with our traders in there, everything I talk about is, we talk about trading, but it's always applicable to life, right? So like trading, you go, okay, well, what do I don't even start with, okay, here's how you trade. But first question is, what makes you who you are as a trader investor? Where are you currently sitting with your current wealth? Where are you currently sitting with your current income? What are your short, mid, and long-term targets for both? What is going on? How many hours do you really have a day that you can trade? And none of this, I'm going to pull my phone out in the middle of the day while I'm at work and doing that, How many hours do you really have where you can do it,
Well, you haven't seen that you can trade billions of dollars like Tori Trades does from her cell phone in the movie theater? Come on.
Man, I tell people, don't trade from your phone, period. That's
I agree with you.
So easy to be emotional with that.
Tillman attempted to have that, what do you want out of life and what kind of decisions are you ready to make, while I was at the blackjack table with him last week at the Bitcoin conference. He tried to have that conversation. I said, we're doing it right now. These decisions I'm making are the decisions I want to make right now. And
well, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, I just want to fly close to the sun. Let me
Oh man. Well, but that's the thing though, right? With trading and in life, you have to first of all figure out where are you. Then you have to figure out where do you want to go.
Bingo.
And then you actually have to make a freaking plan. You can't sit there. If you're missing any of those steps, you're not going to get where you want to be. You have to be realistic. You have to do the work. And like Tillman said, the further that you want to go, the more work it's going to be. There's just no two ways about that. How serious are you about getting where you want to be?
One of my high school buddies' dad, who's since passed, his name was Wally Olson. He was a legend in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Okay, Wally. He was about 6'6", about 147 pounds, but had the personality of a 300-pounder. Right. So shout out to Wally Olson, who has since passed. But his, one of the phrases that I picked up, in high school and been in college is very simple, right? It's plan your work and work your plan. It doesn't say anything about how genius your plan has to be, right? You don't have to have a genius plan, but if you have a plan and then you work the plan, there will be outcomes, right? Which will allow you to maybe adjust the plan and have a bit of a better plan. But if you don't start out with some plan and then actually work it, you're going to get nowhere. You're never going to get anywhere. And so
it's so true.
Wise word.
Yeah, exactly. Those are exceptionally wise words. And it's also the attitude that you bring into working that plan, right? Because if you're a trader that every time you lose, you carry that energy into the next trade and you're trading with scared money, you're not working a plan that's going to work. You're throwing good money after bad because you're emotionally attached to the money that you're using. And so just like Chris was saying, like trading applies to life because it's just an extension of emotion and life is built on emotion. But like if you have a stop loss or a profit target that's further from your origination point, you're going to suffer more ups and downs before you hit those. It's just a function of time and distance, right? And so you have to know what you're capable of, and you have to fit your plan around you and what your design naturally allows you to be gifted in. And if you're not the person that can ride the roller coaster of massive swings, you probably should choose shorter distances to cover, smaller gaps in terms of your profit taking. And part of working that plan is just finding out who you are and what you can stomach and what you can't. But it goes back to, what do you want out of life? I think if we're all honest with ourselves, what we really want is freedom of time. That's what the game is all about. I can show you people. I mean, there's an old parable, and I'm going to butcher this, so don't judge me. But the old parable is,
hit me with it. Come on.
The old parable is the wealthy guy from America goes to a Caribbean island and he meets a guy who owns a boat. The guy takes him out fishing for the day and they have one hell of a time. They catch all the fish they can eat. They're sitting on the beach around a bonfire at the end of the day eating fish. And the rich guy says to the boat owner, this has been one of the best days I've ever had in my life. We could expand your fleet. Let me finance 5 more boats and we can do this and make a real business out of it. I don't think there's a better experience than I've ever had in my life. And the guy goes, yeah, I'm not really interested. I just like to do my thing. And the rich American starts going, well, you don't understand the money that you can make. And he starts showing him the pro forma and multiplying the math. And he gets to a point where he goes, and if we do this successfully for 2 years, you'll be able to do whatever you want every day. And he goes, I do that now. And the moral of the story is know what you want and know what you have. Because if you have freedom of time, it's sometimes not worth chasing the dollar. That's the whole game, is just get freedom of time. And so Bitcoin, why do we talk about it so much? Because it's proven over 16 years to give you exceptionally high percentage chance of getting some freedom of time. It's a force multiplier. It's compounding on itself. It's not the only thing that does that. Real estate's been the money maker of all money makers for middle class for the last, how long, 50 years, ever since they really started doing more, mortgage-backed securities. So we're in a time where it's just shifting, and more people need to start asking themselves the hard questions of like, is my money working for me or am I working for my money? And it can be that you're not at a place where your money works for you hard enough to where you can have 100% freedom. That's okay. But start focusing on getting 1% freedom, 2% freedom. Like just focus on shifting it from you working for 100% of your money to you working for 90% of your money, and you realizing passive income investment opportunities that are now 10% of your take home. That in and of itself will cause a light bulb to flip, and you go, oh man, if I can do 10%, I can do 50%, I can do 100%. And then once you get to 100%, you may not be rich, but you're going to feel rich, because you're going to be able to do whatever the hell you want to do every single day the rest of your life with pretty good certainty if you build the model right. So that's kind of, to me, is like where it starts, where your threshold is, and how many boats do you want in your fleet before you can say, I'm rich and I can do what I want,
Yeah, that's great advice. It's wisdom. It's hard to find. It's even harder to implement. And one thing that I've always remember is a saying that I can't say it. I can't pull it off. I was ready to go for it.
He's trying to fake the seriousness. He couldn't do it. I'm glad he couldn't. Y'all were saved. Just understand, y'all were saved.
I couldn't do it.
I could see the struggle in your brain. It was like the mouse jumped out of the wheel for a second, and you were like, no, get back in the wheel.
Listen, I could get a good look at a T-bone if I put my head up a bull's ass, right? But I'd rather take the butcher's word for it, all right?
I'm the butcher.
Wait, you're the butcher. No.
You're the butcher. I'm the butcher, and you're the T-bone.
Well,
you're the T-bone. I'm an idiot.
I think Tim was kind of hitting on one of the reasons why, a lot of retail aren't like getting interested in Bitcoin. We always hear that, oh, well, I'm not going to get rich, or it's only going to do a 2X or something. But, it becomes, and so that's the thing. People have a longer term goal that they want to get there as quick as possible. And they say, oh, well, Bitcoin isn't going to get me there at all, much less over a long term, right? But your long-term goals, again, I think I've said this before on the show here. I think I've been saying quite a bit to our people there at the Academy. But, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So, when you're thinking about your long-term goals, and you absolutely have to have them, divide that into shorter-term goals to get you on your way there. Psychologically, emotionally, accomplishing them shorter-term goals will help fuel your continuation towards your larger term goal. You have that sense of accomplishment. Guess what, guys? That's what everybody's doing with all these apps. They're all gamified. They're all made so that you can feel like you're accomplishing something.
Well, you go from a risk it all attitude to a builder attitude. And a lot of people, I think the misconception that people have is that compounding small amounts of money over long periods of time doesn't make you rich. They don't understand that. And it's a guaranteed recipe. And I mean, as guaranteed as anything in life. It's as guaranteed as taxes. If you put small amounts of money in growth vehicles that compound annually at a very consistent rate, you are Warren Buffett. That's literally what his model is. He doesn't take big risks. He's not swinging for the fences. He's buying cash flow that multiplies every year very consistently. And, you can go, I've got a website that's pretty good. I think it's DCA BTC or BTCDCA.com. And it's a dollar cost average calculator that allows you to go, okay, if I put $200 a month into Bitcoin and I do that consistently for 5 years and I fast forward 10 years, what does the potential value of that look like compared to historical performance? And it starts to show you that, like, you just have to change the course 1 degree.
Yeah.
like just literally 1 degree, and you're going to prove it to yourself is the point. Like literally 1 degree.
But that's the hardest thing, right? I mean, we're emotional. We're human beings. That's what makes us human, is our emotion. But at the same time, that's what makes it difficult for us to make that 1 degree change, which is why most people never reach that level of freedom, that level of whatever goal that they want in life. To them, it's too much work, right? It's too much work to change my habits, to change my thoughts, to change my direction just 1 degree. But I'm going to sit here for the next 40 years and whine and complain about it instead of doing something about it. And that's tough, because you know what? It's tough, making that decision to do it. it's even tougher looking back 40 years later and going, I wish I had done that. But you don't get to that point, until 40 years. And that's the problem.
Well, most people look at, like I just did, it's DCABTC.com. And it's a fun tool. I play with it all the time. I think you'll enjoy looking at it. But I put in, if you had put $100 per week into Bitcoin, that's doable. That's doable for a lot of people. Okay, that's $400 a month. You can pare down your expenses to include that in your budget. I don't care if you've got two income household. Very easy to accomplish. $100 a week. If you had done it for the last 7 years into Bitcoin, you'd have $253,000 in Bitcoin. You would have over 2.5 Bitcoin, or 2.5 roughly. But that's insane. That's 7 years. Like, fast forward that 30 years, and you have generational wealth based upon you doing $100 a week. That's, to me, something that, it's just, there's no vehicle I found that's like it. And there's no vehicle that I think will ever be like it. Because I don't think, even if I created the exact same protocol and just cloned Bitcoin's protocol and launched it tomorrow, I could ever get the organic buy-in. The security of the network would be compromised based upon its growth curve. What happened with Bitcoin is it organically grew before the money was recognized to a point where the code was uncrackable, that you used more computing power to get to that point than 10 universes could ever harness to regress to the beginning again. So it's one of those things, like I think Bitcoin is going to be etched in humanity as a permanent global inflation indicator. There's only 19 million of them. There will only be 19 million of them left. And with every decade that passes, there's going to be trillions and trillions and trillions of more dollars printed.
Yeah. And so imagine if Warren Buffett, 5 years ago, whatever, had bought, again, just used 1% of what they had to just put it into Bitcoin. I mean, I was looking at something here showing they've had these huge, their cash positions right now, last year and this year, absolutely insane. Now, in going to cash over the last year plus, they've missed a lot of opportunity. But like you said, he doesn't take a lot of chance, he feels like the top's nearby, so he's going to start getting out. But man, just something like that. Like you said, 1% loss is nothing huge. But man, imagine the returns that you could get on that, having especially with his level, his company's level of wealth. Man,
it could be a small fraction that could have massive implications. Absolutely massive.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but
the orders of magnitude of risk that you take beyond certain, like if I say to you, okay, I've got $1 billion I need to place, and you say, I've got an 8% IRR, I've got an 8% return annually that I can put that money to work in. That vehicle producing 8%. Me trying to chase a 9% yield with $1 billion is not proportionally risky. It's exponentially more risky. And with every degree that you chase, the percentage of failure goes up a lot more than the money that you're chasing is worth, especially when your goal is wealth preservation and annual compounding, right? If that's your goal, you almost want to find the yield right above tax-free munis. You know what I mean? Like where it's above inflation, but below the failure rate from a risk perspective, and kind of right in that sweet spot. That's what he's focused on. And that may be boring vanilla for everybody else, but for him, he's just looking at it as the highest predictable growth compounding rate that he can acquire through, high cash yield businesses and services that aren't going away, like insurance. Like, that's never going to go away.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but again, that's what this whole show has been, right? It's been about this idea that retail losing interest, but institutional, big money interest continues to grow, right? And we see that. We see the ETFs continue overall to just load up on. We see the companies again, all these companies becoming these Bitcoin treasury companies, and we see all these different things happening at the higher, those with more capital, but those with less capital kind of getting bored and, kind of right now, I guess probably flipping into to Ethereum, doing a little bit there. No real surprise there, honestly. Ethereum was beat up for quite a while here. Some money heads over there from retail anyway. But I mean, I think, again, I just continue to say that if you're not continuing to stack Bitcoin, I think it's going to be one of those things where you look back in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you go, what the hell? I missed that opportunity. And you can't get that back. You absolutely cannot get that back. So, I mean, I can't tell anybody what to do, but damn, if I'm looking at that possibility, and maybe that's just something because I'm 50 years old and I've done similar things in my past where I've ignored opportunities and then looked up 30 years later and said, what the hell? If I had taken that opportunity, I'd be displaced. But, I don't know, words of experience here, maybe.
I just think life goes by quicker than you think. You know what I mean? You blink and you're 25 years out of college, and you all the plans. And when you're young, you keep telling yourself, "I'm gonna hit one of these balls. I'm gonna hit." You know what I mean? Like you're swinging for the fences, and you're young enough to think, you know what, this is one of these is gonna make the payday for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. I am that type of person. I've swung for the fences so many times you can't even imagine, and struck out a lot of those times. But I will tell you this, you shouldn't only do that.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason to. So have a mindset where you're going, you know what? A wise mindset is diversifying my interests. One, swinging for the fences is going to take 100% of your focus, and you're going to have to pour everything you have into that entity for it to be successful. The other is so passive, it should not impede you from pursuing the former. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing wrong with you pursuing a highly risky entrepreneurial path of, bust or boom. But you can be putting $100 a week into Bitcoin while you're doing that without any extra burden of thought or management or anything else. There's very few opportunities for that. You can't incrementally buy pieces of valuable property at $100 a chunk. You can't.
Yeah. Andrew, is there anything specific going on with the big guys this week here that we haven't really seen, maybe talked about too much?
Yeah, we've gotten numb to the reality, and the reality is simply a reminder that we now have, I think, more than $125 billion in AUM in the Bitcoin ETFs collectively. 75 billion of that is in BlackRock's IBIT, right? So in 2024, the highest estimates associated with inflows into Bitcoin ETFs was $10 billion. We are now, I don't know what the multiplier is, but orders of magnitude beyond that. Yeah. Headlines associated with BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF being the fastest growing and most successful ETF in the history of ETFs. The previous version was the gold ETF and how fast that grew. Well, that took something like 1,600 days to get to a certain number. And BlackRock's IBIT has blown through that. So, we've gotten numb to those headlines. We've gotten numb to Paul Tudor Jones or Ray Dalio. We've gotten numb to, there's another huge hedge fund magnet out there that's talking about being long Bitcoin and being short MicroStrategy. I think it's Chanos. I think it's Jim Chanos that's pulling that off. And we've gotten, given another 2 months and we'll be numb to additional Bitcoin treasury companies. Like I don't see crypto Twitter talking a lot about Peter Thiel's bullish going public. That's not all over the
Andrew, I didn't even hear about it until you mentioned it today.
Yeah,
I haven't even heard it.
2-3 years ago, that's the only thing that CT would have talked about for 3 months. And so it just goes unnoticed. So the underlying floor for the bid of Bitcoin is sky high, like absolutely sky high. And again, it's the reason why, we've ranged. So we popped from 105 and change up to 110, inside of a few hours.
Yeah.
And everybody and their brother's like, there's not a whole lot of volume. I don't trust this. I'm not so sure. 2 days later, we're at 109.5. And the lowest that we've gone is 108.6, 108.4. So again, the bid remains, and a sizable portion of that time frame where we got to 110 was over the weekend. And again, remember, we used to live in a world where huge things happened on the weekends because Asia took over, Binance was messing around with the price, yada yada yada. That does not happen anymore. That does not happen. So it's extraordinary the way that things have shifted. And I'll say it again, 2 years from now, we'll be living in a different world associated with Bitcoin price action that is dominated by debt markets that are connected to Bitcoin as an asset. And we're on our
remarkable
way there.
Stuff. I think what you just said, coupled with the fact that retail's bored, is the story. Because to me, I think the retail's missing the potential here. And what is that potential? It'd be no different. Like, I think I can't remember, Sailor or maybe somebody else really smart had said Bitcoin. The closest thing that we can compare Bitcoin to is land in Manhattan. And if you own land in Manhattan, you never sell it. You can get people to develop on it for free. You can ground lease it for 30 years and just have a huge cash cow. You can borrow against it for an infinite and refinance it every 5 years, and it's more money and more money and more money, paying back that loan with less potent money. So it's one of those things that you never get rid of. So I want you to take that analogy now and think about what you just said. There's a skyrise building that's getting put down in Manhattan. And in the past, how would that skyrise building have been funded? By the elites, by the people like at the very top of the real estate food chain, the Donald Trumps of the world. There'd been a secret meeting. We're building this tower. How much money do you guys want to get in? None of us would have had access to put our dollars right next to the biggest people in the world and own a piece of the asset that they're all fighting for. That exact analogy is where we are today with Bitcoin. We can put $1, if that's all we have, next to the brightest minds in the world who are putting in huge amounts. And that world, from an access perspective, has never existed. And that's what I think makes Bitcoin so special. It's IPO access to the most scarce, highly desired commodity base asset that's ever existed. And you can buy in as small as incrementally as you can afford. That is insane to think about.
Yeah, and it's, and when you think about it, it's amazing that that more of retail isn't getting into it or anybody else. But here's the thing, you always come across somebody who says, "Well, convince me." If somebody ever comes at me and says, "Convince me," I never even do it, because at that point, what they're saying is, "Listen, my mind is made up." Nothing you can say is going to change that. And so, until you actually have an open mind, you can't grasp what's being said, right? You can't grasp what you're going to miss out on, what you've missed out on in the last 5 years. And here's the sad thing is it's easy to keep that whole kind of local thought, right? So you remember how you felt when Bitcoin was at 1,000 and, and you were like, man, I should get some here, but I'm not going to because I'm scared or whatever, right? And now Bitcoin's at 110,000. And you don't really exactly remember how that felt just a few years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago when it was at 1,000. But man, if you could, and then seeing it 110 now, like I said, just like 8 years later, I mean, this is insane.
What I don't think they realize, though, in their minds, and I've been here, where you go, can it really go to 1 million? Can it really go to 10 million? And what I want people to realize, that Bitcoin, the only way the number doesn't go up is if they stop printing money. So that's the bet you're making. You're not betting that Bitcoin's going up. you're betting that governments are going to continue to print. That is the bet. So if you can get your arms around that bet, Bitcoin is a hell of an option for you, and I mean a hell of one. It's not. Will Bitcoin go to infinity? No, but it's going to go as close to it as you can get based upon the time that we're allowed to print cash. And printing cash is the easiest way within a government to buy loyalty. That's, where you divert that cash is where you get the votes, literally. And so it's never going to go away as the mechanism to gain and garner power. But Bitcoin will always measure against that very accurately, because the numerator is the number of dollars printed. The denominator is the number of Bitcoin that can ever exist. One number's moving all the time.
The great part, the great part too about the analogy associated with, like commercial real estate in Manhattan is, for all intents and purposes, all the little guys got in on the commercial real estate deal before the big guys got there, right? Yeah. And so they're having to, purchase additional rights from the little guys, and you don't have to sell it to them if you don't want to. That's the best part of it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's really, it's really something. I'm just thrilled to be a part of it, right? It was really cool to spend time at the Bitcoin conference the way that we did, to see the people that are involved, to rub shoulders with folks that we did interviews with, and where the industry's going and why and how. It's just a unique story that we haven't seen in finance, in my lifetime. We just haven't seen it. Yeah. And one of the things I come back to, I love to talk about Larry Fink and his price prediction and all that stuff. I'll continue to say that there's no version of the future where Bitcoin, the actual just Bitcoin price in dollars, doesn't match Berkshire Hathaway Class A shares, which are, let's call it 700 to 800, 850K right now. Again, that is a legacy company that, for all intents and purposes, is filled with Geico insurance and railroad stocks. I mean, and cash. So is, a world-changing technology and hard money more valuable ultimately than old world technology from the 1800s and insurance? Yeah, probably. So I remember, 9 months ago on this show, I actually said, I don't know, getting to 500K, that just feels, I don't know if we ever get there. I don't know if we ever get there. That feels like a lot. But, the Larry Finks of the world convinced me that if, that's probably where we're headed.
Well, if you're a small business like the ones we're helping,
yeah.
Do you care about the price of Bitcoin when the bank's lending you the money to buy it?
Yeah, right. No, no, you don't. You don't.
Yeah, exactly.
You absolutely do not. It's just a question of, do you have a programmatic way to continue to buy it?
Correct.
Irrespective.
That's right. Bingo. It's about management at that point and deployment. Like, execution has now become paramount. Well, we can't not address the op return, debacle within the community, because people should educate themselves on this. There is a very big argument that's going on inside the Bitcoin development community. There's a group called Bitcoin Core. They've been around the longest. They have a protocol called op return, and they have just voted to remove the 80 megabyte limit to that protocol, which is essentially inviting hitchhikers to hitch a ride on blocks that are being used to settle financial transactions, like Bitcoin being sent from one place to the other. And now you can piggyback a rune or an image or some other data set on top of that financial transaction. And there's another group that's essentially running a knots. It's called KNOTS, and that's the version that keeps the limit in place and a filter in place that only allows the protocol to process financial data pertinent to Bitcoin and not any other peripheral value add like runes. And it's a very important argument because it will fork the chain. The question becomes, how intelligent and educated are the people participating and how quickly will the migration of miners and nodes start to migrate to one or the other, and who wins? Right now, Knots is gaining a lot of momentum. I think they're up to like 12% of the nodes running their protocol. But we do need to constantly be aware of this as a community. It's no different than if you were living in a community and you were on a residential housing row and somebody came in and said, we're changing the speed limits from 25 to 55. Well, guess what? That has implications that you should be aware of and you should educate yourself on, and you should be able to speak somewhat intelligently about, because it does affect us. And what it's going to do, just I can fast forward. Remember in 2024 when the runes were all the rage?
Yeah, I remember that week.
Yeah, exactly. But do you remember what the fees were on the network?
Oh God, yeah, they jumped. Yeah.
Oh, they 10x'd.
Yeah.
And it made the nodes and the miners a ton of money in a very short period of time.
And it was right after they had the halving, right?
Yep.
Right.
Well, that's exactly why they're fighting for this, because they want to go back to that heyday of graffiti art being the reason why their nodes and mining, their ASICs are making money. That's not what Bitcoin was intended for. That's not what Satoshi's vision was about. And so I'm in the camp of, let's keep the block size as small as possible so that everyone can participate and you don't have a high concentration risk of miners aggregating under just publicly traded companies, because that's eventually what happens. The larger the block size, the more expensive the computer needed to process it is. And the further you go up that, you basically price everyone that's the small fries out of the game. And so I do believe we should maintain the network for what it was intended and what the highest and best use case is, which is store value and transfer of store value. So that's kind of my 2 cents. Not too much more to touch on it, but I just wanted our community to be aware of the internal fights that are going on. And if you see op return or KNOTS, now you know what they're talking about. And I'm telling you that it's gotten caustic. You can't even comment on anybody's, like, from core development, Bitcoin core development. If you start following those guys and commenting with even rational comments, it's so contentious that they will cuss you out and call you names that shouldn't be uttered publicly, and it for no reason. It's unbelievable. So that's not something that we can ignore, and we need to, as a community, kind of understand what both sides represent and make our voice known. That's bottom line.
Yeah, and well, and we were talking about that real quick before we were going to go on, and I got lost power there. But I was telling you the same thing. I was like, yeah, no, I'm good with it. Keeping it, not expanding the block size and all that. And it just, so we're kind of sitting on that same end there.
Well, why messy up the Bitcoin mainnet, the on-chain data with pictures, when you can do that on an infinite number of layer 2s and now layer 1s, like Flare? Yeah. Literally, you can mint your own FBTC, which is keeping your BTC on the mainnet, but at the same time minting a new F asset that represents that value, and you can muddy up that water as much as you want. Put a bunch of runes all over it.
Side stream, right?
Yeah. Make them as colorful as you want to make them. Yep.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy stuff, man. It's like, it's like no matter what you do in life, folks, you can't get away from the drama. Remember high school? It's everywhere, guys. It does. I'm 50 years old. It doesn't change. And I'm Gen X. And so as Gen X, my first response to anybody about anything is your mother, right? I mean, that's just really the way it is. We had to learn to live a certain way back then.
Yeah.
We don't, most Gen X aren't real big fans of the drama and the nonsense and the whatever. But there's always going to be, as long as there's a voting mechanism, you're going to see this. And like Tillman said, it gets to the point of stupidity where you're getting just everything is outright insults immediately. There's no real conversation going on. And, whatever it is in life, if you can't have real conversation, then, what the hell?
Well, it tells me that the community that has that type of attitude doesn't want to teach the rest of us what they stand on. They can't stand on their arguments, so they stand on their insults. And when you do that, all you're doing is shaming people from learning about what the issue is, and not having their input because you think you're smarter than them. And I don't deal with that very well. Bitcoin Core has been fabulous for the community. They've done some of the best work on the chain that we have ever come up with. Their Bitcoin improvement protocols are, the standard. But this deviation of removing the 80 megabyte limit is self-serving and for financial gain reasons. Like, that's the only reason why you would do it. And so a lot of people have kind of said like they're not what they used to be, and we need to adjust accordingly. And I would agree with that.
So there we go, guys. Listen, we made it. We made it. The little difficulty there at first, but we made it. We got our hour in here. We got about 2,000 people watching, so we appreciate you guys all joining in and listening in with us. Again, we like to have a little fun, but we like to share a little knowledge and, of course, our thoughts along the way. And at the end of the day, I think what Tillman's really saying here is, listen, he respects your right to have your opinion either way, but he's not a big fan of you just not really talking about your position, attacking the person rather than the argument itself. And I agree with that. I really do. Again, I'm not here to convince you otherwise. I think most people that jump up with the idea of, oh, well, convince me. If you're coming in with that, you have to really look at yourself, because usually when you say that, you're pretty stuck on whatever position it is that you have, and you're not open-minded enough to even really consider anything else. So it doesn't do anybody any good to sit there getting some long drawn out back and forth with that if both people aren't open-minded. So
well, and it's not constructive for the community. The community needs to be as united as we possibly can. And I think that's what's the problem with politics is let's focus on the 80%, not the peripheral 10%,
Yeah. No, exactly. And, as human beings, though, I mean, we're all old enough. We've seen this happen multiple times throughout history with different things. This is just human nature, right? This is what we tend to end up being. So the more you can notice it, the better you can position yourself. And at the end of the day, that's what this show is all about, right? It's about giving you information, give you a little comedy, a little fun, and hopefully helping you, regardless of what you think about things and what's going on, giving you enough information to help you position yourself to effectively deal with it to the best of your ability as the years go by.
And I do want to have one call to action. If you guys, any of you have businesses that you own that are in the audience, and you would like to see what a Bitcoin treasury strategy would look like inside of that business model, we will put that together for you as a demonstration for free, because we are educating ourselves right now on a lot of different businesses and how you can fit a treasury strategy inside of that business and make it as potent and optimal for kind of that business plan as you can. So, lots of free work that we'll give you guys if you want to throw some business models and or opportunities that you guys have control over our way.
And how do you want to do? You want to just DM you guys or something?
Yeah, DM us and reach out. You can email us as well. It's andrew@thearchpublic.com or tillman@thearchpublic.com. So
I'm going to get him to give me an email address there one day just so I can say Christopher at thearchpublic.com.
No. We already have it waiting for you. It's CDawg@thearchpublic.com.
Is that DAWG?
CDawg, DAWG. Yeah,
that's what it needs to be with Gen X, man. It's got to be dog.
Right.
All right. Hey, listen, thank you all for joining in with us and waiting for a little bit there with a little bit late start. as always, remember, the only thing you control is how much you lose. So please keep working on that risk management, no matter how you're reaching out about it. And, again, if you're trading, I'm telling you guys, you should have, even if you're trading Bitcoin, you should have some separate bag of Bitcoin that you just keep adding into. And if you want to do that in the smartest way possible, join these guys over there at Arch Public, and they'll help get you going on that. All right. And I guess Canada's coming up here pretty soon, guys.
1st of July.
1st of July. If you're in Canada, I know we got a couple on here that are anxiously chomping at the bit, waiting for you guys to get out there. So
we've been testing this whole week, and we have had perfect, flawless execution on all the API bridges. So we're looking good.
Fantastic. All right. Hey, listen, everybody, have a great day. Have a great end of your week there. Thanks again, guys. As always, we'll look forward to seeing y'all next week. And hopefully we'll have another new all-time high and maybe some more big information to throw on out there to everybody.
See you, everybody.
See you guys.
All right. Take care, everybody.